Okay, so we are beginning with the beginning of the press. The press during the 18th and the 19th century in India. This is undivided India. We have discussed earlier about the theoretical basis of how the media functions. Ideally, the media functions for the betterment of a society in a democracy. And the idea of a functioning media is that it upholds the values of democracy. It appreciates each and every segment of the society uh, for serving democracy, human rights, uh, social uplift, support for minorities, and individualism as well as collective benefits and everything, and criticize everything that goes against that. So, but the earlier videos that we have seen, like Chomsky and others, uh, we see that press doesn't always do that. Like it's not possible for a social institution, which also is a profitable institution where you want to earn money, uh, to be in an ideal form. But then the question is, uh, how far does an institution move from the ideals of democracy to become part of the problem instead of being part of the solution? And this is the perspective with which we will uh, go through the development of media in the subcontinent. And also we'll just see what were the basic reasons for beginning of certain media outlets from the beginning till now. What interests did they serve? How much did they serve humanity, democracy, and values that are useful for a functioning democratic society? So the press began in the 18th century. It began in, let me see. Oh yeah, it began in the first effort to start a newspaper was in 1761. There was a guy named William Boltz who decided to begin with a newspaper. He affixed a poster on his door asking people to give information about the East India Company's corruption. So he would be happy to publish. East India Company decided to uh, arrest him and deport him to England. They didn't want that to happen. The reason Boltz was against them was not because of any humanitarian concerns, but rather he was a loner who came to India at that time and earned a lot of money by being advisor to different Nawabs or Rajas in India. He learned Bengali, so he was uh, fluent in Bengali, so he could easily penetrate different states and the India of that time. People in the East India Company didn't like this because they wanted to have a monopoly of everything in India. And they wanted him to share his wealth with them. He didn't. And at the end, he decided to go against the media. He knew that it will not have any impact in India, but when the newspapers reach England, it will certainly have impact because in England at that time, the House of Lords were not happy with the way these people were earning money and coming to India and imitating the lifestyle of Nawabs. There is a word in English diction which is naboob. And this is a word used for people who were part of the groups that looted different parts of India and then imitated that lavish lifestyle in England. So naturally, the lords and all the privileged classes didn't like it. William Boltz, when he went to England, he wrote 2 books about the East India Company, which were debated then in the British Parliament. And at the end, we see that for the first time in 1793, the East India Company was asked to sign a charter with the British Crown, and there were rules. Before that, there were no rules. And the first serious newspaper is the Hickey's Gazette, which was, I think, 1788 or something like that. That newspaper also was a product of an enmity within the British circles, people who didn't like each other. So there was one very powerful person who was sent to India because he was too powerful to be left in Britain. And they said, okay, just get rid of him, send him to India. Since he didn't like it, he started a newspaper using an ordinary printer to publish stuff against different functionaries of East India Company, like the Chief Justice, and people like that. So that was the second one. But that's just the beginning of the institution. But you see that there is no idea of democracy, of social uplift, or things like that behind that. The first newspapers that started were by the Srirampur missionaries and in Bengal. So these were the newspapers which the church, the Dutch missionaries in India started, and they were initiated for the propagation of Christian faith. So that was the first one. And then as a counter effort to Christian newspapers, there were other newspapers by Bengali reformers who thought that their religion is being attacked, so they thought they should respond. So they started newspapers. These are known as counter-missionary press. The first newspapers in the subcontinent were in local languages. That is known as the vernacular press. So I have given also links so you can see who the people were, how did it go, and everything. So the very beginning of press in the subcontinent is not related to any social amelioration or democratic transformation, because there was no democracy at that time. But when we say that, we shouldn't be oblivious of the fact that there were newspapers which did serve democracy, values of humanity, not of human rights. It's too early to talk about human rights, but there were kind of a lot of effort going in. And I have decided to devise these 3 categories, like the Anglo-Indian journalism. Anglo-Indian journalism is the one where British in India started newspapers. The real mission behind those were to satisfy the needs of the British in India. But there were exceptions, and we'll talk about that. The Indo-Anglican press is the one where the Indians started English language newspapers. And then there were Indian language journalism, which is basically what we call the vernacular press, like in local languages. So the first new people who started with vernacular press or Indian language journalism was the missionaries, and then the Hindu and Muslim reformers followed suit. The Indo-Anglican one, the newspaper Hindu is still there, Hindustan Times and the Indian Express. So these newspapers still exist, and these are one of the pioneers. The Hindu, if you get some time, please do read the Hindu. It really, they're a very good article. It's like Dawn or even better, because I think Indian press in the English language Indian press is freer than the Pakistani English language press. It's not that free as it was the Pakistani one. The Times of India is still there, which was basically an Anglo-Indian enterprise. And so this is what I said. There were missionaries, there were reformers, and there were journalists. I'll tell you who they were. And there is also a movement from missionaries to commercial newspapers. Commercial newspapers are the one that we see right now in the market. These newspapers are published to earn money, and there is nothing wrong with it. Many people think that commercialization has harmed the missionary zeal of journalism, and it's because our journalism is not good because it has become commercial. That's not true, because when you earn your living through a profession, you know the boundaries, and you really understand, you care for ethics, you do it right. Like, being corrupt has nothing to do with being commercial. That's a fact that we have to understand. Most of the people who started journalism was in Calcutta and Bombay, and then Aligarh movement, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan with his newspaper, Paisa Akhbar, not Paisa, I forget the name. It was which basically served the cause of Muslim awakening. And then the commercial press was Paisa Akhbar, which started in Lahore. You should know, the building is still there. If you wish to visit it, there is a building where there is a plaque showing Paisa Akhbar. It's in Anarkali. And Akhbar-e-Aam was also started in Lahore. So the beginning of the commercial press, which was really successful, started in Lahore. So you can, I'm sure I have seen the plaque for Paisa Akhbar in Anarkali Bazaar, so you can see that. So we have a press which developed out of individual efforts, out of institutions, and then there was solo journalism. Like the Sirampur missionaries represented the institution of the church, basically. So they were missionary because they wanted to propagate religion. The same was true for the counter-missionary or the reformist press in the subcontinent, but it had an individual flavor because Raja Ram Mohan Rai is known as one of the early reformers in India in 19th century, who started by reforming the Hindu religion and also tried to reform the education system in India. So he was an educator. Most of the people who followed him were teachers in Bengal. And then we have people like Robert Knight, who really strengthened the institution of journalism in the subcontinent. Then Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, who is an important figure in both in making the Urdu language more easier. Like Maulana Altaf Hussain Hali and Sir Syed Ahmad Khan are the two people who made Urdu easier enough for everybody to speak. And he also used his journalism to do the same. And then Munshi Mehboob Alam is basically the owner of the Paisa Akhbar. And he was the one who started with commercial journalism. So solo journalism means that it's one person's view that is shown in the media. I have given two images. I'll share the PowerPoint with you, which also has links so that you can read. So one of the pictures is Robert Knight's, and the other one is naturally Paisa Akhbar, which, as you can see, was published in Lahore. And the building is no more Paisa Akhbar, but it has the name both. The reason that I have chosen Robert Knight is that he was one person who really did journalism that we consider as professional in our present day. Robert Knight worked with the Times of India and the Statesman. And what he did was during the Bengal famine in India, he wrote against the British. And he was an outsider. So he was somebody who would have ideally aligned with the East India Company because he was here in India. And for his benefit, the best thing would have been to support whatever the British did. He didn't. He was one of those professional journalists that anybody could be proud of being even today. And he wrote about the Bengal famine. Uh, Let me tell you what the Bengal famine was, that there was a famine in Bengal where so many people died, like thousands, I think millions, something like that. But the real reason was that Bengal had a lot of crops. Bengal was rich. There shouldn't have been any famine. But basically what the British did was that they brought grain from Bengal to places where they have posted their military. And since the British Empire, after the War of Independence, had expanded to even present-day Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, to the Khyber, so they had to really supply uh, grain for themselves and also for people who aligned with them. And they did it so mercilessly that at the end, there was no grain in Bengal. And people in Bengal died of uh, unavailability of food. Knight wrote about that. He said, common ordinary people didn't know what was going on. They didn't know where the grain went. They didn't know why people were dying in Bengal. First, it was not in an age of social media, so like today. It was then. And at that time, nobody knew about that. So if there was a famine in Bengal, nobody would have known about it. Newspapers wrote about it. But Robert Knight went a step further and he explained the reasons of the famine in Bengal. And he criticized the government for being so selfish and inhuman. And that's really brave by any standards that at any time you compare Knight's attitude with anybody who's here in the business of journalism today. And you will see that he stands very tall. And that's very important to understand that good journalism always existed. And that if somebody is not doing good journalism, it doesn't mean that good journalism is not possible. Like imagine during the Raj era, where the British were all powerful, they had already won a war of independence against the locals, and they were going all out against everybody who criticized that. And still there was somebody who stood. He was jailed. I think he was deported in the end, something like that. You can read about Robert Knight in the article that I have shared. So that's how we see it. That's how there's something that started to serve smaller interests like individual interest, the interest of a small group who hated each other, then religious benefits, then counter-religious arguments. And then there is somebody within 60 years, then there is somebody who's just doing journalism for the benefit of the people, something that we would love to have in our own country, any place. So we see the development of journalism with all these great examples. And I also mentioned Paisa Akhbar and an image of it, because I think it's very important that somebody at that time had the courage and the vision of making journalism a profession. Like journalism was a profitable profession in other countries, but not in the subcontinent. And this newspaper just started doing it. So that's something that I wanted to talk about. I'll stop.